Tonight, I'm taking you back to a freezing night in December 2001, a night that should have been filled with warmth and laughter, but instead became a nightmare for a man named Kevin Brody. That Christmas in Dallas was brisk. Kevin, a 48-year-old businessman, was in his modest kitchen, busy preparing his favorite dish for the holiday gathering he had planned with close friends. It was a cozy little house. The rhythmic clink of knives echoed softly, blending with the gentle hum of a radio perched by the window. Everything pointed to a peaceful holiday. But some nights don't follow the script. Family members later described that evening as unsettlingly quiet, as if even the wind paused to witness what was about to unfold. One detail after another seemed orchestrated. And in that house, Kevin wasn't truly alone. He had a companion, not a person, but a small creature, quiet, loyal, a better friend than most of us will ever know. But this isn't a story about peaceful memories. I'm telling this so you understand. Even in the safest place, your own home, evil can knock, wearing a familiar face and speaking in a familiar voice. Tonight's story isn't just about a crime, it's about loyalty, about a tiny soul who rose up when everyone else fell silent. This is the story of the Christmas Eve incident, and it all started with a voice echoing from a quiet kitchen no one paid attention to. Let's open the first page of this tragedy. When rage erupts. The silence of the house shattered, with a punch that landed like thunder. Jason Carter, once an employee at Kevin Brody's company, said nothing. No warnings, no yelling, just a clean, hard shot to Kevin's face, strong enough to knock him down. The sour scent of whiskey and old cigarettes clung to him like a second skin. From behind, Mike Carter, Jason's half-brother, entered, like he'd been waiting for his cue. Before Kevin could make sense of anything, both men slammed him to the cold tile floor. The front door slammed shut behind them, heavy, final, as if the outside world had just vanished. "Jason! Mike! Have you lost your minds?" Kevin shouted, struggling beneath the weight of their bodies. But a middle-aged businessman was no match for two younger men burning with rage, alcohol, and years of pent-up resentment. Jason yanked a stiff, cold extension cord from behind the couch and tied Kevin's hands. Mike rummaged through the kitchen, the same kitchen where Kevin had just been seasoning his roasted chicken. He returned holding two paring knives, small, razor-sharp blades meant for trimming vegetables. But in Mike's hands, they were weapons, and he was smiling. That smile wasn't accidental. It was intentional, dark, like he was savoring the control he now had over Kevin. The blades glinted under the kitchen lights, reflecting in Kevin's wide, terrified eyes. He'd seen that look once before, not in a dark alley, but in a brightly lit conference room, years ago. When a call from accounting revealed Jason, the very man now standing over him, had forged company checks and betrayed him. Now Jason was back, and this time, he wasn't here for money. The first stab tore through Kevin's shirt and slid into the soft flesh of his side. He screamed, "Jason, please, don't!" There was no pride left in that voice, only raw, paralyzing fear. But the stabs kept coming. Once, twice, 15 times. No one was counting anymore.
When we arrived at the scene, the victim was lying in the centre of the living room. The wounds weren't just fatal, they were angry, each one deep, erratic, driven by fury. Forensics suggest at least two people alternated stabbing him, while the other held him down.
As the violence raged on, Kevin's screams grew faint. But something else was watching. A small figure at the end of the hallway. Frozen at first. Then it moved. A blur. A sudden flap of wings. And then it dove, fast and furious. It wasn't Harold Miller, the friend Kevin had called out for earlier. It was Harold, his cockatoo. Small, fierce, loyal. A companion who knew how to fly, but didn't know how to stay still and watch his human die. Kevin was still conscious. He saw it, a flash of white slicing through the kitchen, heading straight for Mike. And in that moment, Kevin's eyes changed, from terror to hope. No one expected a bird to become the nightmare of the night. But that's exactly what happened. In a chapter even the killers never saw coming. The friend who couldn't speak. I still remember the day I got a call from Mike Carter's sister. She was in tears, unable to believe her younger brother had just been named a murderer. But what shook her even more wasn't that he was a suspect, it was how we found him. Her voice trembled as she recounted a story that was terrifying and almost surreal. It all began with someone no one would have expected, a cockatoo named Harold. As blood spread across the light hardwood floor, Kevin Brody, a man who once ran a company with over 30 employees, could barely scream anymore. The knives of Jason and Mike Carter had nearly silenced every last ounce of resistance in him. But then a subtle silence was suddenly broken by the frantic beating of wings. Thwack, thwack. The two men kept stabbing, unaware of the flash of white charging out from the bedroom like a bolt of lightning on a blood-soaked Christmas Eve. The cockatoo, Harold, burst into the room, feathers flared, eyes blazing red with rage. Scientists often describe cockatoos as highly intelligent and emotionally attuned creatures. But in that moment, Harold wasn't just a pet, he was a warrior. Harold launched straight at Mike, talons clawing into his messy hair, his beak pecking viciously at Mike's forehead and temple. The thwacks of the knife suddenly stopped as Mike screamed, jerking backward, flailing wildly to get the bird off his face. Jason turned around, ready to threaten the bird with a knife, but things had already spiraled out of control. "Creak!" Harold screeched, less a sound, more a primal accusation. He darted back and forth, slashing through the air, driving Mike off balance. In the chaos, Mike didn't realize one thing. Blood was now dripping from a gash on his scalp, staining the pearly white tip of Harold's beak. What followed, if you'd even call it a fight, was fast, frenzied, and over in seconds. Unable to take any more, Jason grabbed Mike and the two bolted out the back door, leaving behind Kevin's lifeless body, a ransacked living room, and a panting cockatoo, feathers disheveled, still staring defiantly toward the door that had just slammed shut.
I've been in this field for nearly 20 years. Never have I written a detail in a crime scene report quite like this. Alongside the body, the overturned furniture, and the blood trails, there was something else. Blood on the bird's beak. At first we assumed it belonged to the victim, perhaps from contact or proximity, but when we ran the DNA, it wasn't Kevin Brody's. It was a perfect match for Mike Carter, one of the suspects.
That DNA became the lead that cracked the case. Mike Carter had a prior record for assault, and his profile was already in the national database. Once the match hit, police had everything they needed to get a warrant. Every loose end Jason and Mike thought they had covered, unraveled. And the most damning piece of evidence? It wasn't captured by a security camera. It wasn't whispered by an eyewitness. It was carried on the beak of a witness who couldn't speak, but who acted in a way humans will always admire, with loyalty. Under the sterile light of the interrogation room, I saw Mike Carter's eyes for the first time. He didn't look at me. He stared at the table, squinting as if trying to bring back the image of that night. When asked what gave him away so quickly, he answered, flatly, hoarsely, with no emotion. The bird. It was the bird. I didn't know it would do that. I didn't need to be a detective to know why Harold did what he did, because beneath that white coat of feathers was a heart big enough to turn a house pet into the last hero standing in a blood-soaked home that Christmas night. A case without witnesses. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine the day Mike Carter's sister called me, just days after the murder. Her voice was hoarse, like she had to chew through each word with frozen lips. "You actually caught Mike? How? How could you possibly know it was him?" I paused for a few seconds. Then, slowly, like placing a brick on her chest with every word, I said, "Blood on the beak of a bird." And on the other end of the line, there was nothing but the sound of quiet sobs. In the early hours after the murder, no one knew what had really happened. Neighbors reported hearing screaming around midnight, but no one intervened. Police were called after one of Kevin's close friends showed up the next morning, wondering why he hadn't arrived at their planned meeting. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, chaos. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, pooled across the hardwood floors. And in the center of it all was the lifeless body of Kevin Brody. Near the window, standing frozen in place, was a white cockatoo, its beak stained red, its feathers fluffed in tension, its eyes locked on every officer who stepped inside. The bird was panting, visibly shaken, but refused to leave its post beside its fallen owner. There were no survivors, no cameras, no human witnesses. All that remained was Harold.
When we saw the bird, we naturally assumed the blood on its beak belonged to the victim. It made sense. But something about it just didn't sit right. Trent glances over a crime scene photo showing Harold standing like a sentinel beside Kevin's body. So we ran a DNA test on the blood, and I'm not kidding. When the results came back, we just stared at each other and said, "It's him."
That result didn't just confirm that Harold had attacked one of the assailants, it proved Mike had been injured at the scene. He had tried to cover it up by changing clothes and disposing of anything with blood. A simple test turned into the breakthrough police had been hoping for. As Trent later described it, it was like finding a Da Vinci painting tucked inside an old shirt pocket.
When I examined Harold, he showed clear signs of trauma. Some minor injuries, likely from struggling with the attacker. But what struck me the most were his eyes. He couldn't speak. He couldn't tell us what he saw. But Harold remembered, and Harold grieved.
Dr. Wu spent days working with the cockatoo during the joint forensic investigation. Even in his exhausted state, Harold would hiss at any unfamiliar face, unless that person wore a police uniform. It was like he knew who was there to help, she said, her voice shaking. The search for Jason and Mike Carter quickly turned from a cold lead into a countdown. With the DNA from Harold, a search warrant was issued. Days later, police raided a small apartment on the outskirts of Fort Worth and found Mike Carter in hiding. He said nothing as they cuffed him. But inside the interrogation room, when detectives placed a photo of Harold in front of him, the bird's piercing eyes, and a smear of dried blood still clinging to its beak, Mike broke his silence. "I thought it was just a bird." The truth is, on that night, there was only one witness to everything that happened. He couldn't speak, couldn't write a statement, couldn't call 911, but he carried the evidence on his own body. And here's the thing, Harold didn't do it for justice. He didn't do it for the courts or the headlines. He did it because he loved Kevin. That alone became the last comfort Kevin Brody's family could hold on to. That, in his final moments, Kevin wasn't alone. Harold was there, and Harold fought back. Justice from a feathered friend. I saw Kevin Brody's sister again on the morning of the final court hearing. She stood silently outside the courtroom, clutching a small photo of her brother. Kevin smiling, and Harold perched on his shoulder, head tilted as if whispering something into his ear. When the verdict was read, life in prison without parole for Jason Carter and Mike Carter, she nodded. Her lips pressed tightly together, caught somewhere between peace and pain. "My brother can finally rest now," she whispered. "And I owe a bird, the whole world." Life after that tragic Christmas Eve was far from easy for anyone involved. But amid the public outrage and mourning, one image endured, that of Harold, a silent white bird who refused to be forgotten.
No one ever imagined that a bird could be a witness, let alone the one to help solve a murder, but that's exactly what happened, and we haven't forgotten. Among the names honored for their role in this investigation, Harold's is at the top of the list.
At first, Harold wouldn't eat. He just perched in the corner of his enclosure, occasionally letting out faint hisses like he was calling out for someone. But one day, I played a voice recording of Kevin Brody that we'd recovered. Harold lifted his head, and then he responded. Soft chirps, low coos, he remembered. And even though Kevin was gone, Harold kept living, because somehow he knew Kevin wouldn't want him to give up.
Later, a wildlife sanctuary took Harold in. There, he became a quiet symbol of animal empathy and loyalty. Visitors often described a strange energy about him, something calm yet powerful, almost as if he knew when someone was being honest, or just pretending.
We often talk about justice as something tied to courts, judges, and laws, but sometimes justice arrives in ways no one expects. A hidden camera, a muddy shoe print, and this time, a blood-stained beak from a white bird, something the killers never imagined anyone would notice.
Kevin Brody's life ended in tragedy, but the legacy he left behind wasn't just a company. It wasn't just the people who loved him. It was a truth that friendship, no matter what form it takes, can be the light in a world gone dark. And at the edge of life and death, between man and nature, between senseless violence and silent devotion, Harold chose to fight. Not for rewards, not for recognition, but simply for love. The kind of love that knows when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to remember. Harold, you couldn't stop Kevin from dying, but you refused to let his death be meaningless. And because of you, justice found its way home. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, you now know more than most people ever will about what happened in that break room. But the story isn't over. There's still the basement, the notebooks, and the one question no one can answer. Why? Subscribe to the Inkpath if you haven't already, and don't miss what comes next. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. I'm Leon Graves. I'll see you in the next one.